They said she'd never matter, that she'd fade like chalk dust after the final bell. But as laughter echoed through that hallway, no one noticed the quiet fury blooming behind her lowered eyes. The cruel words, the snickers, the careless taunts, they carved something permanent, something invisible. Every insult became a thread, stitching together a kind of strength that no one saw coming. Years later, those voices still haunted her dreams. But instead of trembling, she listened and smiled. Because the thing about pain is that it teaches precision. It molds silence into steel. And as the storm outside her school window raged that afternoon, she made a silent promise. One day they'd remember her name, not out of pity, but awe. The next morning felt colder. Though the calendar insisted it was spring, she walked into school beneath a sky that refused to brighten, where laughter lingered like smoke. Every step through that hallway replayed the same cruel echoes, a cruel loop of yesterday's ridicule. But something inside her began to shift, a quiet spark beneath the ache. The sting of shame gave way to a fragile defiance. In literature class, words became armor. In sketches, she built worlds where kindness ruled. And though whispers trailed behind her, she began to look straight ahead, not to challenge, but to endure. In her silence, she discovered the strange calm that comes before transformation. The moment when pain stops being pain and starts becoming purpose. At lunch, the cafeteria buzzed with the chaos of youth. Laughter too loud, confidence too shallow. She sat at the corner table, a world away from the noise, tracing shapes in condensation on her water bottle. Across the room, a pair of eyes lingered, not with mockery, but with something gentler. She didn't see him, not really, but she felt the difference. When a voice shouted her name across the hall, followed by cruel imitation, she didn't flinch this time. The sound slid off her like water on stone. For the first time, she realized their laughter said more about them than it ever did about her. The storm inside her was quieting, replaced by something colder, resolve. She didn't know it yet, but she was learning how to win by never needing their approval again. After school, the world seemed to exhale. Corridors emptied, lockers clicked shut, and the echoes of laughter finally died. She stayed behind, her hand gliding across the dusty classroom desks, collecting fragments of forgotten lessons. Outside, the setting sun burned orange, painting her reflection against the glass. She studied that faint image, half shadow, half light, and whispered a vow she didn't yet understand. No one was coming to save her. She would become her own rescue. As the wind rattled the windows, she began to write a list of dreams too impossible for the girl they called ugly, but the ink didn't shake. It flowed, steady and certain, like the heartbeat of a future taking shape beneath trembling fingers. That night, silence filled her small room like an ocean. The only sound was the steady scratching of her pencil as she drew buildings that touched clouds, streets lined with her initials, a skyline that belonged to her alone. Outside, thunder rolled like distant applause. She pinned her sketches to the peeling wall, a collage of ambition disguised as dreams. Each paper fluttered with life as the wind sneaked through a cracked window, carrying away yesterday's cruelty. When she finally lay down, the tears came quietly. Not from pain, but from clarity. Someday, she thought, they'll remember this rain-soaked girl who never fought back with words, only with destiny. And as her eyes closed, lightning flashed again, and her lips curved into the smallest, most dangerous smile. The cruelest part of growing up isn't the laughter that cuts, but the silence that follows, the one that makes you believe they were right. Weeks turned into months, and her world shrank to quiet corridors and whispered pages. But even loneliness has a sound, the hum of something changing beneath it. When another cruel prank left her notebook drenched in paint, she didn't cry this time. She just stared, unmoving, as if watching her past dissolve. That night, she cleaned every page, rewrote every line, and whispered a new mantra into the dark. "They don't decide who I am." Outside her window, a storm gathered again. But this time, she welcomed it, because storms, she had learned, don't destroy everything. Sometimes they just clear the sky. The next day, whispers spread through the hall like wildfire. They said she'd finally snapped, that she'd gone strange, silent, unflinching, unreadable. But she wasn't breaking. She was shifting. In art class, her hands moved differently. Deliberate, fearless. Colors bled into impossible shapes. Images of towers rising above storm clouds. When the teacher asked what she was painting, she just said, "The future." They laughed, of course. But beneath that laughter, something else flickered. Unease. Because deep down, even cruelty can sense destiny forming. She packed her brushes, wiped her desk clean, and smiled faintly. Let them laugh, she thought. They're laughing now because they'll never understand what it feels like to build an empire from their echoes. That afternoon, she stayed after school again, not to hide, but to work. While others raced toward weekend plans, she filled notebooks with sketches, business ideas, dreams too wild for the world she lived in. The janitor switched off lights one by one, leaving her under a single fluorescent glow. And there, surrounded by silence, she made her decision. She would leave this place behind. The faces, the laughter, the pain. All of it would become raw material for her empire. She didn't need to win their approval. She would own their skyline. When the final light went dark, she stood in the reflection of the window, no longer the forgotten girl, but the architect of her own legend. Home had always been a fragile refuge, full of love and quiet worry. Her mother worked double shifts, eyes tired but heart unbroken. When she found Elena awake past midnight again, she didn't scold, just asked softly, "Still drawing?" Elena nodded, hiding her trembling hands beneath the table. They sat together in silence, two survivors of different battles. Her mother didn't know the depth of the cruelty at school, and Elena didn't want to burden her with it. Instead, she spoke of the city she'd build one day, of lights and towers and names engraved in glass. Her mother smiled sadly, whispering, "Then build it, my love." That night, the words rooted deep inside her, like seeds waiting for the right storm to bloom. Graduation came with hollow applause. No one cheered for her name, but she didn't mind. She'd already left this world in her mind. As others tossed caps and posed for pictures, she walked away, not out of defeat, but liberation. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers. She clutched her diploma like a key and took the first bus out of town that very night. Through the window, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold. She whispered goodbye to the girl they had mocked, and hello to the woman she was becoming. Every heartbreak, every scar, every cruel word. They had built her armor. The world had no idea who was coming for it. The city was vast, endless, and indifferent, but it had no idea who had arrived. She rented a cramped studio apartment, light leaking through cracked blinds onto sketches and spreadsheets scattered across the floor. Every night became a lesson in persistence, every morning a ritual in resilience. She learned to navigate markets and mergers, coding and contracts, each failure a stepping stone, each victory a whisper of what was possible. While her peers chased fleeting pleasures, she built quietly, deliberately, like a sculptor shaping an empire from marble. No one cheered her on, no one noticed, and that was perfect. Because when the world finally turned its gaze, it would see not a girl who had been mocked, but a woman who had mastered destiny. Internships, late nights, and endless rejection letters became her rhythm. Every no became a lesson in strategy, Every door slammed in her face, a test of patience. She learned to read people, to anticipate moves before they were made, and to value alliances over applause. And slowly, imperceptibly, the world began to bend. Small victories accumulated. A contract won, a pitch accepted, a project completed. She smiled quietly when she thought of those who had laughed at her in high school. They hadn't seen it then, but they would see it soon. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about inevitability. The world had no choice but to notice her brilliance when it arrived fully formed. Tenacity became her companion. Nights bled into mornings, and dreams that once existed only on paper now manifested in contracts, offices, and quiet recognition. She navigated boardrooms where voices tried to drown her, learning to speak in silence, to make every word count. When an industry publication mentioned her as the rising entrepreneur to watch, she didn't celebrate. She simply noted it. The thrill wasn't in attention, it was in creation. And as her company began to grow beyond city limits, she allowed herself the tiniest indulgence, remembering the girl in the rain-soaked corridor. That girl had survived, had endured, and had become a storm the world would never ignore. The city began to know her name, whispered in investment circles, scribbled in meeting notes, murmured in luxury boardrooms. But fame was not her goal. She was meticulous, calculating, moving in ways that left others scrambling to keep up. When a rival tried to undermine her, she countered not with fury, but with strategy. Subtle, flawless, invisible, until the moment it struck. And in the solitude of her penthouse office, she sometimes allowed herself to laugh quietly. The echoes of past cruelty no longer haunted her. They fueled her. The girl who had been ignored, mocked, and underestimated now ruled her own skyline. Silently, elegantly, irreversibly. By her 30th birthday, she had become untouchable in ways the world could measure. Skyscrapers signed with her contracts, partnerships expanding into every sector, and a reputation built not on flashy displays, but on ruthless precision. You and true. She stood in her office, looking down at streets she had once only dreamed of walking, and allowed herself one reflection. The girl who had walked alone through the rain was gone, replaced by a woman whose presence demanded attention. And though the past still whispered faintly, it no longer dictated terms. Now, she dictated hers. Soon, those who had called her ugly would see not just the woman she had become, but the empire she had built. The undeniable proof that survival had been only the beginning. The skyline reflected her ambition, every glass tower a monument to patience and precision. Deals were signed in rooms drenched in sunlight, her name appearing in contracts and city plans without fanfare, without celebration. She moved like a shadow in power, unassuming yet undeniable, shaping the world while others chased fleeting recognition. When whispers of her empire reached old acquaintances from school, she didn't react. She didn't need to. The girl who had once walked corridors invisible now walked the city like a queen unseen, commanding every space she entered with quiet, lethal elegance. The world had learned her name, but the past had yet to see it, not fully. Luxury arrived without notice. Contracts, acquisitions, and properties now bore her signature. Yet she never flaunted success. She wielded it silently, the way a river carves stone over decades. A gala invitation arrived on a crisp envelope, a casual mention of the upcoming school reunion. Her heartbeat flickered, not with excitement, but with anticipation. She remembered their faces, the cruel laughter, the whispered mockery. But she didn't rush to revenge. Instead, she allowed herself to plan meticulously. The empire she had built was not just wealth. It was leverage, influence, and patience. When she returned to that hall, it would not be as the girl, they remembered. It would be as a force that demanded recognition, awe, and perhaps regret. Weeks became months, and the reunion remained a quiet note in the background of her life. She hosted meetings, signed deals, and traveled to cities that once existed only in sketches. Yet she imagined the moment of return, like a painting half-formed in her mind. How would they react? Would they recognize the woman in tailored suits, the one who now controlled skyscrapers and ventures beyond their small town? She didn't seek revenge. The anticipation was in revelation itself. In the quiet of her office, she rehearsed her entrance. The perfect poise, the precise smile. She had become everything they never expected. Confident, unshakable, and untouchable. The city whispered her name in hushed tones at conferences, investment circles, and boardroom meetings. But her presence at the reunion would be the first time the past truly confronted the present. She allowed herself one private smile, not cruel, but knowing. Every insult, every laugh, every sideways glance from high school had been stored and transformed into power. Now, when she walked into that hall, she would not need words to assert dominance. Her presence alone would speak volumes. Grace, poise, and the quiet authority of someone who had survived everything the world threw at her. That would be her message, and they would not forget it. The day of the reunion arrived like a heartbeat, tense, quiet, and charged. Cars glided along the wet streets, reflecting neon advertisements that seemed insignificant compared to the storm building in her mind. She entered the hallways she once knew, now polished and unfamiliar, and the echo of laughter felt like memory, not threat. Old faces lingered, unaware of the woman in front of them. The same girl they had mocked, now sculpted by ambition and resilience. Every step, every glance, every subtle movement announced power without words. And when the first eyes recognized her, the silence was deafening. They had not anticipated her arrival. But she had meticulously, deliberately, and with a grace that made their ignorance feel irrelevant. The doors opened, and a murmur spread like wildfire. Eyes darted, conversations froze, and whispers collided with disbelief. She moved through the crowd with a calm that was almost unsettling, each step precise, deliberate, a testament to the years of preparation hidden beneath poise. Faces that once sneered now betrayed confusion, admiration, and a subtle edge of regret. She didn't smile immediately. She didn't gloat. She simply existed. Elegant, controlled, untouchable. The hall itself seemed to bend around her, lights reflecting off silk and glass, highlighting a presence that was both familiar and entirely foreign. The girl they once dismissed had returned, and the weight of her silence spoke louder than any words ever could. Mark swallowed hard, his easy confidence evaporating under her gaze. Memories collided with reality, the echoes of past cruelty now irrelevant against the tangible power standing before him. Sophie's laughter faltered. The rehearsed charm she relied on crumbled, as she realized the years had transformed the girl they once mocked into a woman who could command rooms without a word. Even Ryan, the quiet witness of kindness, felt a swell of pride and relief. They had expected humility or awkwardness, not authority, elegance, and a calm that could slice through arrogance. Alina didn't need to speak. Every glance, every measured step, every faint curve of her lips was a statement. She had survived, thrived, and returned to claim her space in a world that once ignored her. The first confrontation was quiet, a simple exchange, but it carried the weight of years. Sophie approached, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elena met it without flinching, nodding politely, letting the silence speak. Mark attempted a joke, a poor imitation of the camaraderie they once famed, but it fell flat. Each word he uttered was dwarfed by the aura she carried, the years of struggle, of silent triumph, now radiating in every motion. The room, once a place of ridicule, was hers in spirit before any contract or accolade could make it so. And in that silent victory, Elena allowed herself a moment of reflection. Revenge was unnecessary. The proof of survival, elegance, and dominance was far more powerful than any insult repaid. The room buzzed with a strange mix of curiosity, awe, and shame. Conversations faltered. Eyes followed her every movement, and murmurs attempted to fill the spaces where words failed. Elena navigated the crowd with deliberate calm, shaking hands, exchanging polite greetings, each gesture controlled, each smile measured. Every glance from Sophie or Mark was met with neutral grace, a reminder that time had changed her but not weakened her. And in that hall, she realized something profound. She was no longer defined by their opinions. She was defined by every choice she had made to rise, every risk she had taken, every quiet victory that built an empire unseen until now. The power of presence eclipsed the power of memory. By the night's end, whispers had transformed into quiet acknowledgement. Those who had once dismissed her now studied her with subtle awe. Elena didn't speak of past cruelty. She didn't need to. Her posture, her gaze, her calm mastery of the room spoke louder than any words. Ryan approached her briefly, nodding with quiet pride, while Sophie and Mark remained at a distance, processing the revelation of her transformation. The girl they had mocked, labeled, and ignored had returned not for vengeance, but to remind them of what resilience, intelligence, and ambition could achieve. And as she looked around the hall one last time, she smiled softly, a triumph neither loud nor petty, but absolute. The reunion had become a testament to the power of endurance and grace. The doors opened, and the room held its breath. Elena's entrance wasn't announced. It didn't need to be. Every eye found her as if drawn by gravity, a subtle, inescapable pull. Mark and Sophie froze, faces betraying recognition and disbelief. Ryan's eyes softened, a quiet smile hinting at relief. She walked slowly, deliberately, heels clicking against polished floors, emerald dress flowing, each movement radiating control and elegance. She didn't look angry. She didn't need to. The weight of years, the mastery of self, and the quiet accumulation of power spoke for her. Every glance, every subtle gesture whispered one truth. The girl they had mocked had returned as a force they could neither ignore nor challenge. Sophie finally approached, her carefully rehearsed charm failing. Elena acknowledged her with a polite nod, eyes calm, lips curved in a neutral smile that carried the weight of unspoken triumph. Mark stammered, attempting humor, but the room's tension made every word fall flat. Ryan, standing quietly at her side, felt the full measure of her presence, composed, commanding, untouchable. For a fleeting moment, the hall seemed suspended in recognition, a collective acknowledgement of transformation. Elena had returned not for confrontation but for revelation. She was the same person they had ignored, now sharpened by resilience, strategy, and the quiet power of survival. A hush fell over the crowd. Old laughter had vanished, replaced by a tension that made everyone pause. Elena moved through the hall, shaking hands, exchanging polite greetings, each gesture precise, deliberate. Every whisper, every sideways glance from Mark or Sophie was met with measured grace. The girl they had mocked now radiated authority and elegance, her presence alone a statement of survival and triumph. Even the room seemed to acknowledge it. The chandeliers glinting, the polished floors reflecting her figure, the ambient lights spotlighting her calm mastery. And in that silent power, the truth was undeniable. She had risen above cruelty, not through revenge, but through transformation. The first whispers of acknowledgement reached Sophie's ears. She realized the joke had ended. The girl they ridiculed had returned with the elegance of someone who had endured, learned, and conquered. Mark's bravado faltered, replaced by the dawning recognition of years wasted, opportunities missed, and a world where Elena now held sway. Ryan approached quietly, offering a nod of solidarity, a silent testament to the support that had always mattered. Elena's smile remained measured, subtle, almost imperceptible, as though to remind them that triumph is often quiet, unseen, and undeniable, a far more potent weapon than any scornful word or revenge plot could ever be. By the end of the evening, the reunion had shifted from nostalgia to revelation. Conversations faltered, eyes followed her, and the weight of past mistakes hung heavy in the air. Elena didn't speak of old cruelties. She didn't need to. Her calm mastery, her presence, and her quiet grace conveyed everything. Ryan approached, nodding with subtle pride, while Sophie and Mark lingered at the edge of the crowd, stunned and silent. The girl they had dismissed, ignored, and mocked had returned not for vengeance, but as proof that resilience, ambition, and patience could build an empire that spoke louder than any insult. And in that hall, as she surveyed the stunned crowd, she smiled, triumphant, composed, and utterly untouchable. The reunion had ended, but the hall still buzzed with tension, silent acknowledgments, hushed conversations, and lingering disbelief. Elena stood near the exit, her gaze sweeping the room one final time. She saw the regret etched on Mark's face, the flustered elegance of Sophie, struggling to mask insecurity, and Ryan's quiet pride. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the girl who had walked those hallways alone and mocked. But that girl no longer defined her. Now she defined herself through years of patience, strategy, and relentless perseverance. No words could undo the past, but presence, grace, and achievement could speak louder than any insult ever did. Tonight, the reckoning had been delivered, silent and undeniable. Elena's eyes found Ryan, and she offered a small nod of acknowledgement, the only silent exchange she needed. He had been the witness, the quiet support, the reminder that kindness could survive cruelty. No one else mattered in that moment. She didn't seek apologies, nor did she crave recognition for the years she had endured. Instead, she felt an almost serene satisfaction, knowing that she had transformed every insult, every cruel glance, and every whisper into a life of accomplishment, confidence, and purpose. The reunion had been the stage. She had played her part perfectly, with no need for theatrics. Her presence was the final act, complete and undeniable. Mark finally spoke, his voice hesitant, tinged with shame. Sophie followed suit, her charm faltering as she struggled to regain composure. Elena listened, calm and composed, allowing the moment to linger. There was no scolding, no bitterness, only quiet authority. She didn't need to punish them. The proof of her triumph had already been displayed in every detail of her poise, confidence, and success. Their remorse, tentative and incomplete, was enough to underline the truth. Cruelty may wound, but it cannot define a person who chooses resilience. And as she turned to leave, the subtle smile that touched her lips carried the full weight of years spent building a life beyond their narrow judgments. Elena stepped toward the exit, each movement deliberate, her presence leaving a subtle echo in the room. Conversations paused. Eyes followed her as she passed. The girl they once mocked had become a woman whose life was a testament to endurance, strategy, and quiet triumph. She didn't look back with anger. There was no need. The power of what she had achieved, and the grace with which she carried it, was more potent than any confrontation could have been. The room, the memories, the whispers, all had been acknowledged, and in her calm departure she offered a final unspoken lesson. True strength is revealed not through revenge, but through the life you build beyond cruelty. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the faint hum of the city beyond the hall. Elena paused for a moment, gazing at the skyline she had once only dreamed of, a life she had painstakingly built from the fragments of her past. Every insult, every act of cruelty, every moment of doubt had been transmuted into resilience, strategy, and success. She smiled softly, a smile that carried both remembrance and triumph. The girl they had called ugly had returned, not for vengeance, but to show the world, and herself, that true power is measured not in how others treat you, but in how fully you rise beyond it. The night embraced her, quiet, victorious, and utterly untouchable.